In 1954, a 12-year-old boy in Louisville was crying over his stolen bicycle. 6 hours later, that same boy would walk through the doors of a sport he'd never heard of. And 6 years after that, he'd win an Olympic gold medal. That boy's name was Cassius Clay, and that stolen bike was the beginning of the journey that would make him Muhammad Ali. It was October 1954, and 12-year-old Cassius Clay was having the worst day of his life. He'd saved up for months to buy his pride and joy, a red and white Schwinn bicycle. It wasn't just transportation. It was freedom. It was independence. It was everything a boy could want in 1950s Louisville, Kentucky. That Saturday afternoon, Cassius had ridden his bike to the Columbia Auditorium for the annual Louisville Home Show. The place was packed with families looking at the latest appliances, home improvements, and local businesses showing off their wares. For a 12-year-old, it was like a carnival. Bright lights, free samples, and the excitement of being around so many people. Cassius spent hours walking through the exhibits with his friend Tunny Hunsaker. They sampled free ice cream, watched demonstrations, and marveled at all the new inventions on display. When it started getting dark around 6 p.m., Cassius said goodbye to his friend and headed outside to get his bike. But when he got to the spot where he'd left it, his heart sank. The bike was gone. "No, no, no," Cassius whispered, looking around frantically. Maybe he'd remembered wrong. Maybe he'd parked it somewhere else. He ran around the entire building, checking every bike rack, every possible spot where he might have left it. But deep down, he knew the truth. Someone had stolen his bicycle. The tears came immediately. This wasn't just any bike. This was his bike. He'd worked odd jobs around the neighborhood for months to save the $60 to buy it. He'd delivered groceries, mowed lawns, and even helped his father paint houses. Every dollar had been earned through sweat and determination. But more than the money, this bike represented something bigger. In the segregated South of the 1950s, opportunities for young black children were limited. That bike was Cassius's way of exploring his world, of feeling like he had some control over his life. And now, it was gone. Standing outside the Columbia Auditorium, 12-year-old Cassius Clay was consumed with rage. He wasn't just sad. He was furious. He wanted to find whoever had taken his bike and make them pay. He wanted to hurt them the way they had hurt him. "I'm going to find who stole my bike, and I'm going to whoop him," Cassius declared to anyone who would listen. His voice was shaking with anger and tears. "I don't care how big he is. I'm going to whoop him good." A security guard at the auditorium heard the commotion and came over to help. When he saw how upset Cassius was, he suggested something that would change the course of history. "Son," the guard said gently, "if you want to report this theft, you need to go downstairs to the basement. There's a police officer down there who handles these kinds of things. His name is Joe Martin." Cassius wiped his eyes and nodded. He had to do something. He couldn't just let this go. Someone had to pay for what they'd done to him. The basement of the Columbia Auditorium was a world apart from the bright, bustling home show upstairs. It was dimmer, quieter, and filled with an odd rhythmic sound that Cassius couldn't quite identify. As he walked down the stairs, the sound got louder, thump, 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 followed by the shuffle of feet. When Cassius reached the bottom of the stairs, he discovered the source of the noise. The basement had been converted into a boxing gym called the Columbia Boxing Club. Young men were hitting heavy bags, jumping rope, and sparring in a makeshift ring. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and the sound of leather hitting leather. Cassius had never seen anything like it. He stood transfixed, watching these fighters move with a grace and power that seemed almost superhuman. They weren't just throwing punches randomly. Every movement was calculated, purposeful, beautiful in its own violent way. "Can I help you, son?" a voice said behind him. Cassius turned to see a white man in his early 30s wearing a police uniform. He was shorter than Cassius had expected, maybe 5 feet 8 inches, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately put the boy at ease. "Are you Officer Martin?" Cassius asked, his voice still shaky from crying. "That's right, Joe Martin." "What seems to be the problem?" Cassius explained about his stolen bike, his voice getting stronger as his anger returned. "I want to report a theft, and I want to find who did it so I can whoop them." Joe Martin listened patiently as Cassius told his story. He'd heard similar tales hundreds of times, kids getting their bikes stolen, wanting revenge, thinking they could fight their way to justice. Usually, he'd take down the information, file a report, and send the kid home with little hope of ever seeing their property again. But something about this particular boy caught his attention. Maybe it was the fire in his eyes, or the way he carried himself despite being only 12 years old. There was something special about Cassius Clay, though Martin couldn't put his finger on exactly what it was. "Son," Martin said carefully, "I understand you're angry, and you have every right to be. But if you're going to go around threatening to whoop people, you better learn how to fight first." Cassius looked around the gym again, watching the boxers training. "You mean, like them?" "Exactly like them. Tell you what, we train here every Tuesday and Thursday night, 6 to 8 p.m. If you're serious about learning to fight, come back on Tuesday and I'll teach you." Cassius nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. I'll be here." "But understand something," Martin continued. "This isn't about revenge. This isn't about hurting people because you're angry. Boxing is a sport. It's about discipline, respect, and learning to control your emotions. If you can't handle that, then this isn't for you." "I can handle it," Cassius said, with the confidence that only a 12-year-old could muster. Joe Martin smiled. He'd seen that confidence before in young fighters, though it usually faded after the first hard punch to the nose. But something told him this kid might be different. "All right then, I'll see you Tuesday. And Cassius?" "Yes, sir. Don't come looking for revenge. Come looking to better yourself." That Tuesday night, October 12th, 1954, Cassius Clay walked back into the Columbia Boxing Club. He was nervous, but determined. He'd spent the weekend thinking about nothing but boxing, reading everything he could find about the sport, and practicing punches in front of his bedroom mirror. Joe Martin started him with the basics: how to stand, how to hold his hands, how to move his feet. It was harder than Cassius had expected. His arms got tired after just a few minutes of holding them up in fighting position. His legs ached from bouncing on the balls of his feet. And when Martin put him in front of a heavy bag for the first time, Cassius's punches barely made it move. "This is harder than it looks," Cassius admitted after his first training session. "Everything worth doing is," Martin replied. "The question is, are you willing to do the work?" Cassius was. Over the next few weeks, he threw himself into training with an intensity that surprised everyone at the gym. While other kids his age were playing video games or watching TV, Cassius was at the Columbia Boxing Club, learning the sweet science of boxing. He learned that boxing wasn't just about throwing punches. It was about strategy, timing, and mental toughness. It was about studying your opponent, finding their weaknesses, and exploiting them. It was about staying calm under pressure and never giving up, even when everything seemed hopeless. More importantly, Cassius learned about discipline. Joe Martin was a strict teacher who demanded respect and hard work from all his fighters. There were rules in the gym, and breaking them meant going home. Cassius learned to follow instructions, to listen carefully, and to push himself even when he didn't feel like it. Within a month, it was clear that Cassius had natural talent. His reflexes were exceptional. He could slip punches that other beginners never saw coming. His hand-eye coordination was remarkable, and his speed was unlike anything Joe Martin had ever seen in someone so young. But what impressed Martin most wasn't Cassius's physical abilities, it was his mental approach to the sport. While other young fighters got frustrated when they made mistakes, Cassius saw every error as a learning opportunity. When he got hit during sparring, he didn't get angry or discouraged. Instead, he asked questions. Why did that punch land? What should I have done differently? How can I make sure it doesn't happen again? 6 months after that stolen bike incident, Cassius Clay had his first amateur fight. It was against another 12-year-old named Ronnie O'Keefe at a local amateur tournament. Cassius was nervous but excited. All those hours of training were about to pay off. The fight lasted 3 rounds, and Cassius won by split decision. It wasn't a dominant performance, but it was a victory. More importantly, it gave him a taste of what he could accomplish if he kept working hard. "How did it feel?" Joe Martin asked after the fight. "Like I was born to do this," Cassius replied, and even at 12 years old, there was something in his voice that suggested he might be right. Over the next year, Cassius's improvement was remarkable. He won fight after fight, developing a unique style that combined blazing speed with unorthodox movement. He didn't fight like other boxers. He danced, he moved, he made boxing look like an art form. By the time he was 14, Cassius had won the Louisville Golden Gloves Championship twice. By 16, he was a national amateur champion, and in 1960, at the age of 18, he won an Olympic gold medal in Rome, representing the United States in the light heavyweight division. But perhaps more importantly than any trophy or medal, boxing had given Cassius something that stolen bike had taken away: a sense of control over his destiny. In the ring, it didn't matter what color his skin was or where he came from. All that mattered was skill, determination, and heart. Joe Martin later reflected on that first meeting in the basement of the Columbia Auditorium. "I've trained thousands of fighters over the years," he said in an interview years later, "but I never saw anyone with Cassius's combination of natural talent and work ethic. From that very first night, you could see he was special." The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the story. If Cassius's bike hadn't been stolen that day in October 1954, he might never have discovered boxing. He might have become a successful person in some other field, but the world would never have known Muhammad Ali. That stolen bike, which had seemed like such a tragedy to a 12-year-old boy, turned out to be the greatest gift anyone ever gave him. It led him to Joe Martin, who became not just his first trainer, but a father figure who taught him that anger could be channeled into something productive. It led him to boxing, which became not just his profession, but his passion, his art, and his platform for speaking out on issues he cared about. And it led him to understand that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can become the catalysts for the best things in our lives. Years later, when Muhammad Ali was the most famous athlete in the world, reporters would often ask him about his beginnings in boxing. He would always tell them about the stolen bike, about Joe Martin, and about that basement gym where it all started. "I'm grateful to whoever stole my bike," Ali would say with a smile, "because without that theft, I never would have become a boxer. I never would have won the Olympics. I never would have become heavyweight champion of the world. Sometimes the worst day of your life turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. The lesson from Cassius Clay's stolen bike isn't just about boxing or becoming a champion. It's about how we respond to adversity. It's about turning anger into motivation, setbacks into comebacks, and obstacles into opportunities. That 12-year-old boy crying outside the Columbia Auditorium had no idea that his stolen bike was actually the first step on a journey that would make him the most recognizable athlete in the world. He couldn't have known that his tears of frustration would eventually become tears of joy as he stood on Olympic podiums and held championship belts above his head. But maybe that's the point. We never know when our lives are about to change. We never know when a seeming disaster is actually a disguised opportunity. All we can do is choose how we respond to what happens to us. Cassius Clay chose to fight back. Not with his fists, at least not at first, but with his determination. He chose to learn, to grow, to become better than he was before. And that choice, made by a 12-year-old boy in the basement of the Columbia Auditorium, changed not just his life but the entire world of sports. Today, the Columbia Auditorium still stands in Louisville, though the basement boxing gym is long gone. But there's a plaque on the building that tells the story of what happened there in October 1954. It reads, "On this site, a stolen bicycle led to the discovery of the greatest heavyweight champion of all time." If this story moved you, remember that your setbacks might be setups for your comebacks. Your greatest challenges might be preparing you for your greatest victories. And sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you might just be the best thing that ever happened to you. Just ask Muhammad Ali. He'd tell you that getting his bike stolen was the luckiest day of his life.